The world's most extraordinary individuals are not remembered by what they had, but what they did for others. Instead of wealth, status, and power, their lives were not measured materialistically, but by the influence they had on the people that knew them. This documentary will examine the life of Harriet Golden, how she became the person she was, and how she's remembered by the people who knew her.
How do you measure the life of a woman or a man? In truths that she learned, or in times that he cried, in the bridges he burned, or the way that she died. It's time now to sing another story now. Let's celebrate, remember, here in the life of the ride. Remember the
Okay, this is an interview with my mom that's taking place on October 13th, 2013, 2 weeks before your 94th birthday, right? Right? Okay, well now looking back on your life, did things turn out the way you had hoped?
Yeah, things worked out very well the way I hoped. But it was still a good life. I had my children, I had my family, and my mother and dad.
It felt to me like her life was precisely what she wanted it to be. You know, she made this beautiful family. She kept an amazing home. She had creative outlets. She spoke her mind. She was just an amazing individual. And I don't think everyone, and I don't think women in particular, growing up in the era that she grew up in and came to be in, had that same outcome.
So Grandfather Eisenberg, when he came to this country, wasn't he a peddler? I mean,
He was a peddler.
he didn't have any money then, right? So how did
He only had money. He got a horse and a wagon.
He got a
that
horse.
Was it.
That was it.
That was it.
So how did he become so successful? How did that happen?
People had a lot of rags, I guess.
A lot of rags. He was a rag peddler.
Rag man.
Wow. And eventually he saved enough money to.
Evidently, he did. And then the boys too. They're always working.
Yeah.
And that family, they were like 5, 6 years old. They were selling papers. They were doing everything to earn money in those days. He probably did something right, Susan. Wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, good for him. Yeah, coming up from being a rag peddler with a horse and cart.
From nothing.
Yeah.
They came over on the boat in storage, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
They had no money, especially when they left the other country. They're not going to hand them a load of money to come over here.
Yeah.
Samuel, his wife, and 3 children settled in Worcester, Massachusetts because an uncle lived there. The easiest entry-level job for a new immigrant was rag collector. Bed linen and underwear were cheap. When they wore out, people would throw them away. Ragmen collected the dirty linen so they could be cleaned and used to make paper. High linen content was used in early paper, and one of the primary sources was bleached cloth. That's why some newspapers were called rags. Since Samuel knew little English, the uncle would write out in Hebrew characters such phrases as "Good morning, madam," and "Do you have any dirty rags?" The Hebrew characters themselves do not spell Hebrew words, but when pronounced from right to left, they sound like English words if read from left to right. Once Samuel had a small amount of money, the uncle introduced him to wholesalers who extended credit and provided newly manufactured goods to peddle. Now he could sell products like needles, threads, lace, ribbons, mirrors, picture frames, watches, jewelry, eyeglasses, linens, and bedding. Peddlers with a wagon could carry heavy items such as stoves and sewing machines. The uncle helped secure licenses, which nearly all jurisdictions required, and bonded him. Again, something mandated by state law. Without this family connection, the Eisenberg family would certainly have had a difficult time.
My grandmother and grandfather, they were very loving people, but they didn't really show love the way my grandmother Louis did. You know, they were more aloof. And, but they were good. They loved their grandchildren, but we used to go there and visit, and they'd have the Passover. We're all there for Passover. And I remember me and my cousin Eunice used to go there, and Sunday we'd go to Elm Park, pick flowers and drop them off at my grandmother's to give her something special for that day. And she was a hard worker, always cooking and baking and doing things, you know, like that. And very good person, my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my grandfather, he was nice and very, very religious. But he wasn't really, you know, a warm person like my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the way. Of course, the family meant everything to him too.
Sure.
Her grandmother, Bubby Lewis, because she just loved that woman. And so she would always talk about, you know, going to New Jersey, Bayonne, New Jersey to visit her and all of her aunts. And she just thought that was so cool because they were, you know, just her time alone with them. And I think she must have been the oldest grandchild in the family, I think. I'm not sure. But I definitely think she got pretty spoiled when she was sent there. And she would talk about how her grandmother was like widowed, you know, so she was widowed at a young age with 5 kids, and how she supported the family by going back and forth into the city, into the wholesale market, where she would buy goods for the town and come back and resell them. So one thing that kind of happened later in my life, which was kind of cool, was I then moved to New York City and I worked in the wholesale district, right? So I remember always just thinking about that and kind of what a cool circle that was.
What I admire is that I personally felt that she just really loved her family. And that's sometimes often overlooked. Sometimes you kind of put money and work and all these other things and make these your priorities. And I don't think Grim ever made any of that her priority. Her priority was always the family. And I think that's what grounded us when we were with her. And that's what I admire most about her, that she just really loved her family.
Yeah, kind of what you said. I think like she was like, whenever I don't remember much because I was really little when we always visited her. But from what I do remember, she was always so like grateful for when we came and like made us feel so welcome and like loved seeing us so much.
Yeah.
Family's everything. And she showed that every holiday. She opened her home to not only the, you know, immediate family that lived there, but also cousins and extended cousins. And yeah, that was like what she lived for, was hosting Jewish holidays at her home.
Lifespan is the number of years that a person lives. Remembrance span is the number of years that the memory of a person survives. For example, Harriet's maternal grandfather, Samuel Eisenberg, was born in 1861 and died in 1944, so his lifespan was 83 years. Harriet was born in 1919, so she of course remembers him. She survived until 2018, 74 years later. That makes Samuel's remembrance span 157 years. Samuel's physical appearance, the sound of his voice, even some of his mannerisms, stayed alive in Harriet's memory. The reason why this is important is even after a person's death. The memory of a past ancestor can still affect your own life, even in ways we don't notice. We both emulate the actions of our forebears we respected and avoid repeating what we perceived as their mistakes. And one theme you'll hear over and over in this film is the importance of family. This comes directly from Samuel Eisenberg. Peddling in America was different than it had been in Europe, where many peddlers faced a lifetime of selling from packs on their backs. Peddling here was one of the few positions that had within it the mechanism for saving. Say a peddler sold a tablecloth for $1. He pays the creditor, who bought it for 40 cents, 50 cents. That leaves 50 cents the peddler can stash away to eventually open a store of his own. 15 years later, Samuel and his son Joe started United Wholesale Grocery, which grew to be one of the largest wholesale houses in New England, with yearly gross reaching into the millions. The United States was very good to Samuel Eisenberg. Starting as a poor immigrant, he obtained a level of integration and economic well-being that he could not have imagined in Russia. It's no wonder that Samuel thought that family was very important. When we estimate Harriet's remembrance span, some of her older great-grandchildren could easily be alive in the year 2100, making Harriet's remembrance span around 180 years. What stories will they tell about her?
What do you remember about your mom, about her personality? What was she like?
My mother?
Your mother.
My mother was one of a kind because she was good, she was smart, and she never had a grudge against anybody, and she was always doing things to improve her life. And her family, of course, was number one with her.
Yeah.
And she was a very loving person.
Yeah.
And she and my father were very close.
And it was an arranged marriage, too.
It was an arranged marriage. It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
That was because of my grandmother. My grandmother had all these relatives coming from all over all different countries staying with her. And one of them, I guess, knew the Eisenbergs from Worcester, and it was staying with my grandmother there. And so then they mentioned my mother, and then they managed to get them together, and that's how it went. A lot of the women were like that at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Matchmaking.
Yeah.
What was your father like?
My father was a hard worker. He was always working, it seemed to me, but he was also very loving. And he was always doing things, taking us. We used to go for rides on Sunday or go on trips. And in the summer we would go to the beach, and my father used to leave us off, and then over the week for 3 days he'd drive out to wherever we were at the beach and stay with us. And it was so crowded to get there. They didn't have the tunnels and they didn't have all that. They had to drive for hours to just get to a very short distance in that time.
Where did you go? What beach did you go
We
to?
went to Winthrop and Revere.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't that far away, but when you go without the tunnels and without everything in it, it is a very long way.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the important things was when my brother was born.
Okay.
Because I was an only child for 6 years, and my brother was absolutely perfect in my eyes anyhow.
How would you summarize Harriet's relationship with her brother, your father?
Oh, she just adored him. She doted on him whenever she saw him. And in her eyes, he could do no wrong. She was 6 years older than him. She helped raise him in a way.
Think back all the things I remember when my brother was so sick. No, when he had that nephritis.
He had nephritis?
Yeah, nephritis.
Really?
He was in the hospital.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And they didn't expect him to live. And, terrible.
He's lived a very long time. What's the earliest thing that you remember from your childhood?
I remember we used to go to the beach I think it was Winthrop. We used to go to every year. And my dad, of course, was working, and he could come in only the weekends. And it was just me and my brother and my mother that we rented a room, I think, over some kind of a cottage or something. And I remember we used to go to the beach, very big waves there, and also the rest of the family would come too. My grandmother Eisenberg was there, and different cousins would come too. So my Aunt Annie was there with all her children.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was really like a little community of us. And I remember Winthrop, it wasn't sand we used to walk on, it was stones. To get it on the beach and in the water, we had to walk on these stones.
Oh.
And but it seemed to be a very popular place to go there for the summer, so. And we had the whole family there.
So you were close to your aunts too?
I was very close to my aunt. Every weekend I took the bus and went to visit my grandmother. That's what I did every weekend.
Uh-huh.
And so, and my aunt Isabel was right there. She lived right close to my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
And the families were very close in those days.
Yeah.
You know, they remember the ones that came over from Russia and all of them. They were always together. Of course, then my dad got sick, and I wasn't too good after that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it made me think about a lot of things.
Yeah. So when did he start having to use a cane or have trouble walking?
Yeah, well, as years went by, he was having more and more trouble
Uh-huh.
walking, and he was a salesman, so we always had to carry that case with the heavy cans and everything, you know.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So he traveled around?
Oh, yeah, he was a salesman.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So, and then we lived on Pleasant Street, and on the second floor. So it was very hard for my father carrying things up and down. I remember how my mother used to go down to help him, and then when in the evening she'd help him write out the orders for us, what he, the different people that were buying things. And I remember all that, because then my father got worse, so he couldn't do it at all.
Driving Harriet to Columbia University in September of 1938 after a major hurricane and flood hit New England. Dad said the drive to New York was epic. Many of the roads were impassable due to the flooding. The trip took more than 13 hours from Worcester to New York, and William, of all things, left his straw hat in a restaurant on the way. She loved being there. She loved it there, but that she had to leave early.
She went to Columbia, which was amazing, again, for a woman of her age, not of her age, but of her generation, and that she had to drop out, but that's also how she met Pop. And so I don't think she ever looked back on that negatively. I think that was all like in her mind, how it was supposed to happen.
So let's go back to, tell us about how you met Dad.
Oh, I was attending Columbia at that time.
Yeah.
And it was vacation time, and I belonged to this Phi Delta sorority before I and all the time I went there, even before I kept up my sorority and my friends and everything. So when it came, we had a dance every year, a big dance, and here I was at college, and I didn't know who to invite or anything, so my girlfriend Claire said that she knew about Dad, and she said she'd see if she could fix me up with him. So I didn't have anybody. I was in New York. I couldn't do anything, so she did.
Yeah.
And I met Dad, and we met, and I guess we went out. I remember going out at the time. But then he took me skating to Elm Park.
Okay.
And while I was there, I fell in the ice, and the skate went up into my leg and cut me, and I was bleeding all over, and I went home, and I told my mother, and she took me to the doctor and everything. And at the same time, there was this home show for Jewish people and families being held at the auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I could go, but I didn't see any more of Dad after that first time.
Did you need stitches in your?
No, but it was a lot of bleeding.
Okay.
But I went because all my friends were going there, so I went there.
To the home show.
And then Dad was there, so
Oh.
that was the second time. So there was a lot of dancing, things like that. There was a lot of entertainment, all Jewish people.
Uh-huh.
So after that, he called me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of the end. That's how it all began.
Okay. How long did you date?
Well, we dated pretty regularly, I guess. Well, over a year anyhow.
Were you still in college then?
Yeah, I was still in college. Yeah.
Yeah, in New York at Columbia.
Eventually, then I left. I was only at college, I think, 2 years or something. And I wasn't well or something.
I thought you had mono.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So I came back, and Dad was working someplace in Shrewsbury, I think. He was going to veterinary school at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And anyhow, we began corresponding, and then he'd come in for weekends or something, and we'd date, and one thing led to another, and here I am.
How my parents met, and I think it's a story that we all have heard many times, that it was a blind date. But thinking about that, I was thinking like, it's so, I never heard my mom talk about other boyfriends she had. And she must have, because she was beautiful. She was stylish. She always talked about how popular she was. She was very proud of that. So I looking back at it now, I just wonder that. Not that she probably would have felt all that comfortable talking to us about other boyfriends. I don't know. But it almost seemed like with her, at least, it was almost love at first sight with my dad. It seemed like he was the one, and the two of them, no marriage is perfect, but they were just perfect for each other. They were totally devoted to each other. So it was truly a perfect match.
She was just an extremely devoted, wife and mother and homemaker. I remember, it felt like Pop and her family was her world.
Loving. Another word. There's no other word. Loving. She absolutely adored him. And she loved him very much. And there's no other word I can think of. Yeah.
I remember them like showing affection and holding hands and, kissing and, little nice gestures and things like that.
It's funny when their relationship, like, it was definitely whatever he said, he was definitely what he said went at the end of the day, right? It was a different generation. And I think she definitely fought and gave her, she definitely, thankfully they had such a respectful and loving relationship. It worked.
But when I did get to Columbia, I met a very important friend. Remember Ruth Rogo?
No, I don't remember
She was
her.
my maid of honor.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
So we became very friendly, and when it came time for my wedding, she was my maid of honor. And Dad brother, Dave, was best man.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I never heard this story.
That's right.
How big was your wedding?
My wedding was, yeah, I mean, considering during the war, you know, things were sort of cut down, but during the war, my wedding was at the Bancroft Hotel, which is supposed to be a very nice place in Worcester, and it was a good-sized wedding, and everything worked out fine. So that was the beginning of the second stage of my life. Dad was, he enlisted in the war.
Right.
And he was stationed at the Cape. So we were there for a while, and then he had a be shipped to California for training. I joined him there, and it was quite a ride. We had to stay on the plane and the train 3 days overnight, and I didn't know anybody, and I had to be on the second berth going in, and then we landed in Chicago. I'd never been there either, and it was very difficult getting around the station and all.
Was Dad with you, or did you
No.
go by yourself?
Myself.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, yeah.
So eventually, these are all people traveling during the war, so everybody was going in a different direction. But I got into the plane in that booth, and I met a very friendly girl there across the aisle from me. It was a 3-day trip, and that made it nicer for me. And then when I finally got the plane landed in San Francisco, and F was meeting me there, and of course it was wonderful.
War dogs of the Coast Guard, acclaimed for service and devotion to duty, side by side with their uniformed trainers, partners in war and in victory.
We didn't have any place to live except in those Quonset huts. So eventually they began building, and that's the naval station.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to get an apartment, and I got a job there as a secretary, and so we were together a lot, and F was busy with war dogs, training war dogs. I had a lot of shows there. We had these big maps of all the things that was a naval station. So all these maps that they made, where they're going, what they were going to do, all the details. We had to make copies of that. So that's mainly what it was there. And Fran, plus where Fran was, she did more the secretarial part of it.
Mm-hmm. So how did you make copies of the maps?
They had great big machines.
Oh,
Big machines to duplicate them.
Oh,
So,
okay, I didn't know that's what you did.
That's what I did.
Uh-huh.
And so I did that until I was probably about my 4th month with pregnancy, when I was pregnant with you. And then as time went on, I left that job. And but I still had the friends that used to come over, I used to have dinner for them. They used to come over and tell me what was going on, and we used to meet for dinners and lunch and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt bad when the years went by, and we seemed to be trying to contact each other less and less, and eventually it all stopped, and I wonder why I didn't continue.
Tell me about Mare Island.
Well, Mare Island was, of course, it was during the war, so it was all set up for, it was one of the big places where they shipped out the boys for overseas. And they had the housing for the families. And so, first, when I got out there, we were just in a room until Dad could get an apartment for us, one of those military places. And we knew nothing about taking care of a baby. Poor Susan, I don't know what you went through.
Every new couple starts that way with the first child.
I guess so. Yeah. So Dad was a little bit of his training, and me was none at all. We managed.
Yeah.
I remember we used to take you to the beach, and what a beautiful baby. Everybody would stop to admire you. So beautiful, Susan. Still are. And then we were transferred for different places when we were in California after Susan was born. And Shaw Park, it was Shaw Park, I think. That was one of the places.
I only know about Mare Island. There were other places too?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
We were in Mare Island, and then we were there for quite a while, and then during the war. Yeah. And then they detrained the dogs. So we moved from there to Shaw Park.
Detrained? So
what? A detraining center.
So they stopped so that they wouldn't be war dogs anymore? You mean they
Well, that's right, because they couldn't. They were trained to be aggressive.
Right.
So they had to detrain them if they wanted anybody to take the dogs. They were all war dogs.
Right, yeah.
So then we moved to Shaw Park. That's where we were on the water. That's when we were on the waterfront. So then we, it was right there because we were right on the beach, and everything was fine. And we were there again when it was there for, I don't know how long he was there, but eventually it was over and we came back.
So Shar Park, I've never heard of Shar Park.
Yeah.
That was in California?
Yeah, that was in, I never heard of it either till we were there. But we had a house there, and Dad was still going out for some, I don't know what he was doing. That was a deep training center. That's what he was doing.
Did he ever go out on a boat?
No.
Never did?
Never.
Okay.
Always on land. I was lucky. The war ended, and then we were on our way back.
It is almost bedtime. The Pullman porter begins to change seats into beds, taking out backs of seats to make bottoms for beds called berths. Above the seats, he unlocks a big curving door, and inside finds more articles for making up the berth: mattresses, sheets, and pillows. Some he takes out of the berth for the one below, and others he will use for the berth above.
And Susan was on the upper berth coming back, and Dad and I were on the lower berth. I remember when we were so worried that you were going to fall out. But you were a good girl, Susan, a good baby. You didn't.
The porter, having made up these two berths, puts in position a little ladder for the passenger who is to sleep above.
We got there, everybody was real happy to see us.
Growing up, I wasn't aware of the handicap in terms of hearing of Aunt Harriet until much later, when I was in my teens, I guess. I mean, maybe my parents said, oh, your aunt's hard of hearing, make sure you speak slowly to her or speak to her. But it didn't really register as anything more than what they would have said about visiting our grandparents, who were older or something like that.
And I can't imagine anything having more of an effect on a relationship than the ability to communicate. And that is what deafness does. It just creates a lot of difficulties communicating. It was probably one of the reasons why, well, not probably, it was definitely the reason why I chose to go into speech pathology. And from a very young age, I didn't even question it. I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. And I know it was a lot because I saw how important it was to be able to communicate, and how awful it was to not be able to communicate. Because she was a very nervous person, and I often sometimes wonder if I don't think she would have been as nervous if she didn't have to deal with her hearing loss.
But she did share with me later in her life, once she was already in assisted living, that she believed that a lot of her digestive issues were caused by the stress of having to work so hard to understand people when they were speaking. So I know that it was a major stress for her.
Her hearing loss was progressive. So there were, some hearing aids would be good for a time, and then they wouldn't. That, and oftentimes, again, because the hearing aids had to be so powerful, and if the ear mold, they had an ear mold that would fit into your ear to connect to the hearing aid. If it wasn't if the fit wasn't exactly perfect, there would be this high-pitched whistling that would come from the hearing aid, and she couldn't hear it, but we all could, and it could drive you crazy.
She'd sit for hours watching TV with my father, watching a concert. She couldn't hear the concert at all, but she would, again, adapting to my father. He wanted to watch the movie or whatever, the lecture. She couldn't hear it, but she would sit there for hours just to be with him.
So I would help her with her lip reading lessons. I remember we would sit in her bedroom, and I think we were working on like the words to songs. She really loved music, and I would mouth it, and she would try to repeat back what I said. So that was something that her and I did together, because I was the oldest, and I think my sister and brother were asleep at that point.
So at night, when Bob and I, the little ones, were supposed to be in bed, she would, ask my sister Susan to come downstairs with her and practice her lip reading, and I was always so envious of that. I used to sit at the top of the stairs and listen to them, because it was like I wanted to be the one helping her, and I knew how important it was, and I remember that clearly.
I talk louder. In fact, that's what I normally talk loud, and my wife keeps telling me that, because that's what I did all my life. I talked very loud to my mother. Not that that necessarily helped, but I just had the impression that by talking louder, she would understand more. So that definitely is part of me now. I am a person who always talks loud.
I remember as a little girl, before we would go visit her, I would practice my Worcester accent in the mirror to try and make it easier for her to read my lips. So I would practice saying things like ka instead of car, which is a totally different face shape, and try and make it easier for her to communicate with me.
The English you speak in Oregon is different than the English you speak in Massachusetts. And so I learned to form words to sound more like the accent she was used to. So the main difference is R's. People in the West pronounce their R's, and people in Worcester and Boston choose to not pronounce their R's many times. And so, my cousin Derek became Derek, and you form the words differently. And so I learned how to do that to make it easier for her to understand me.
Like whenever I was talking, I knew that Graham couldn't hear that well. So my mom told me to try to that she could only like kind of read lips. So I would try to like speak as clearly as possible so she could understand what I was saying. And sometimes I would have to like repeat what I was saying, but most of the time she understood.
That was, I think, part of the hearing loss piece we always said that was so sad is she was this most social person you could find, right? She just loved being around people and she loved being around the action.
Otosclerosis. Otosclerosis is characterized by an abnormal growth of bone near the middle ear. Otosclerosis is the most common cause of hearing loss in young adults. If left untreated, hearing loss will worsen progressively until it results in complete deafness. Otosclerosis has to do with the small bones in the middle ear, usually the one called the stapes. For hearing to occur, the stapes bone has to vibrate. However, when bone tissue develops around the stapes in a way it shouldn't, this bone development prevents the stapes from vibrating normally in response to sound waves. In the absence of the vibration, sound can't travel from the middle ear to the inner ear. This makes it harder for hearing to occur. Autoimmune disorder can also be linked to the condition. Pregnancy. According to experts, a pregnant woman with otosclerosis is more likely to lose hearing faster than a man or woman who isn't pregnant. Your doctor may recommend a surgery called stapedectomy. With this procedure, a device is inserted into your middle ear that moves the stapes bone, allowing sound waves to travel to your ear for better hearing.
It was interesting to me that I first heard that that one of the things that's well known about this disease is that for women, that if they become pregnant, their hearing gets worse. Is that true? Do you know anything about that?
Right off the top of my head, I don't see how that connection would be made. But yeah, I haven't looked into it. I definitely can. But I mean, what strikes me as probably being true is back then, if that was the working knowledge, then that was a fact back then, right? And whether or not it actually, pans out to be true, that's what she was, told, and that's what essentially was true for her.
She said that many of her friends, her deaf friends, only had one child on purpose.
Wow.
She had a fenestration operation was the very first thing, and then she had something called a stapedectomy. And I was with her when she had that second operation. That was right after she had that surgery was the day that John F. Kennedy was shot. And I was in the hospital with her when I got that news. And that one was also not successful.
What I know now, thinking back on it, for myself as a person with chronic breathing issues and myself as a person who is not ashamed at all to identify with the word disability, is that there were so many struggles that Graham was going through that related to her hearing that she did not share with other people. And one of the ways that the world treats people with disabilities is that our lives are less worthy, or that we're takers, we're not givers, and we're not full participants. And I experienced that in every aspect of my life. And I absolutely know that Graham did too. She never talked to me about it. And I would be very interested to hear if she did talk to anyone about that, and how she got her sense of power back, how she got her sense of meaning. Is that why she preferred family time above all else? Because family was a place where her value existed unconditionally, and it did not exist in the outside world. Also with her global alopecia, right? That's a autoimmune disorder that had a profound impact on her life. That also falls under the chronic illness disability category. I mean, disability and chronic illness were huge in Graham's life. And I wish that I had a chance to talk more openly with her about that as well.
I was really open with her and shared all sorts of things with her. So she knew challenges I was having with a boyfriend. I mean, she knew different things like that were happening. We wrote letters a lot. I don't really remember how old I was when I started writing letters, but because she was hard of hearing, you couldn't really talk to her on the phone. I have really strong memories of her calling the house when we were little. And Pop would hold out the phone and Graham would come over to it and just kind of shout all of her questions into it all at once. And we would hear them on the other end and have to answer back whatever we could remember. And then Pop would relay that to her. And then once I moved to Boston, I learned how to use the operator. I didn't have a TTY, but so I could call a service and they would connect me to Graham, and whatever I said, the operator would type. And then Graham would type into her TTY and then she would read that to me. So it was a really long process for having a conversation.
That was how all the TTY calls started. You're right. There was the person that would connect the two. Yeah, it was crazy, you know?
There were funny stories, like the person typing to us would say, oh, she sounds nice.
Yes, I remember. In parentheses.
Yes.
Or she's coughing, you know? Too funny.
I remember Carmel and Jesse and I were with Graham one time, and she was talking to someone on her TTY, but someone else was using the relay service. And, you know, I don't remember the details of what the conversation was, but there was some drama going on, and we were looking over Graham's shoulder, getting the drama too. And, you know, and Graham would kind of just like, you know, kind of like make her sighs and shake her head and then just type whatever back. And we were all just imagining whoever was the relay service getting all this like juicy gossip back and forth, because they would have to relay what the person was saying and then they would have to, you know, say back whatever Graham said. And I just remember Jesse looking at me and saying, if this is the life of a relay operator, sign me up, or something like that.
I feel really lucky that we had a TTY. I think we got it probably when I remember using it in the 4th grade to communicate with her. And that was preferable than using the relay system because it felt more intimate. It was also awkward because you had to be a quick typist and you had to know how to spell things, which as a 4th grader, I was not, and I could not. I remember once Mom peeking over my shoulder, and I had made a typo that turned the sentence into quite an embarrassing faux pas, and Mom just laughed quite out loud. But, you know, Graham never made fun of me for any of those spelling errors or anything like that.
When I first started making phone calls to her, of course, I had to go through the old relay system that would connect to her teletype. And then I had to wait for them to translate what she said to me. And I'll never forget when I learned that technology had progressed to the point where I could actually call her and hear her voice, and my voice would be translated directly onto her teletype. I was so excited, let me tell you.
Did you type to her on a TTY ever?
No, I used to just play on the machine. Just fool around on it.
I mean, like right off the bat, it was like the smell of the house. The you know, I think we all kind of fell in love with that house because of Grandma Pop. In that, it just felt very. It felt like home. It felt like home to me. And actually, I was lucky because I got to spend a lot of time with Graham. In that, you know, I lived with my dad and Grandma Pop when I was 12. So I lived with them for a year, and then, you know, obviously I saw them every summer for 2 months, and I spent a decent amount of time with them in that house. And so for me, it was the, you know, like just even walking up to it, it was the familiarity, the you know, you almost got to know like every like, you know, nook and cranny of the house, right? You knew the banister, you knew how the little pillars kind of turned when you would like run by them and hold on to them. You knew the smell, you knew the sounds, you knew, you know, it just felt like a, you know, like a really comfortable place. And of course, when I'd walk in, Graham would have like my favorite cookies waiting for me.
I remember sliding down our stairs. We must have killed the carpet on our stairs because going down the stairs, or I actually used to love going up in her attic and just kind of almost exploring. I thought that was the coolest thing was her attic. I loved how big that attic was. We would go up there and just find all her old stuff, her cool stuff, some cool stuff of Pops. And it was really cool. I love being up there. I just, like I said, I remember as a kid just literally loved going there, especially when I was little.
We lived in New York City. My mother was Harriet's sister-in-law, Effie's older sister, only sister, really, effectively. And so we would go up to Worcester to visit my mother's relatives who lived up there a couple or 3 times a year. And we would stay usually with my grandmother, but we'd visit Harriet and Susan and Judy and you know, everyone. And it was just, that was my favorite place to be.
The home always felt so welcoming and full. And part of that, I guess, is I had a different relationship to Graham in that home than some of my other, you know, certainly the cousins that lived in Massachusetts, and even both of my sisters lived in Massachusetts at some point in their lives, so probably had, you know, more frequent visits there. For me, I never lived there. So it was always our family trips, which were a little more few and far between, but it was always felt kind of like a homecoming to come back to that home with all the cousins and everyone. And it was usually a gathering time too, where everyone was getting together and spending time together. And that was just, it was always magical and wonderful. And we were able to really pick up where we left off, no matter how much time had been in between visits. And I attribute a lot of that to sort of the environment in the home that Graham put so much love and energy into.
When you were a kid, what did you like the most about visiting your Aunt Harriet?
You know, this is a great question. I asked my siblings this, and we all said the same thing: the attic in her home on Mill Street. To my siblings and I, when we were young, it was just a wondrous, mysterious place filled with strange and amazing things. We just loved going up there to explore. Because, you know, when you're little, you're never allowed to touch anything at anybody else's house. And she always let us just go up there and explore to our heart's content.
We got to have ginger ale at Graham's house, like for every meal, which was fun because we never got to have that at our house. And oh, the little Andes mints were out on the table. So there was chocolate. I mean, all the things we didn't have growing up was at Graham and Pop's house.
Graham's house was a central location of family gathering, which is exactly what she wanted it to be. You know, she absolutely achieved that goal, that her house on Mill Street was the place where everyone came together. And that's where family, you know, in-home based holidays would happen. That's where, you know, the cousins would create, you know, her grandkids would create, you know, special worlds that we would play into, and we all had roles, and we would just run around and chase each other and wrestle and laugh hysterically and fall asleep in a puddle, you know. And I think that was probably one of her dreams coming true every time that happened. And it certainly was for me as a little kid as well.
Pretty much anything she made, I loved. It was delicious and amazing.
I liked her macaroni and cheese casserole.
Honestly, my favorite part when I was a kid is she would always have the cookies, the frozen ones in the freezer.
Dude, I loved her potato pancakes, and I absolutely loved their magic bars. Those are the magic bars are the best. I remember her making those a lot. And
Just some breakfasts. We had some amazing breakfasts with eggs and bagels and lox and
Yeah,
It was,
that's right.
that was one of
I
my,
think pancakes too, or
yeah,
something.
yeah, one of my favorite things was the big
Yeah.
breakfast.
Her sweet and sour meatballs that Susan still makes. I have not yet tried it because I'm sure it will not come out nearly as good as my memory of my mom's. I loved her mac and cheese. Her macaroni and cheese, I loved. In fact, I saved her casserole dish that she made, this macaroni. That was the only dish she used to make this macaroni and cheese. I've tried it, but it doesn't come out nearly as well.
For me, it was the apricot strudel. My family just loves the apricot strudel.
Her Rice Krispie treats, which she would make and then let me eat hot before they would cool down, which, yes, I burned my tongue, but it was completely worth it.
Her peanut butter cookies were awesome. Strawberry pie was probably the best. She made that for me on my birthday every year.
Jimmy cake, I remember that was delicious.
Of course, brisket. I love the brisket.
Food is really funny because Graham was the consummate hostess. She, in my mind, loved having people over for holidays, and that's always when I was around too, and it was always fun and special to be there. And I remember we didn't grow up eating brisket for Jewish holidays. And I just didn't even know what that was until I went east for college and then was at different people's homes over holidays when I couldn't go back to Oregon. And like everybody always had brisket out. And then I was at a meal at Graham's and there was brisket. And so I was like, I don't understand. What is this brisket? Why do we never have it? And then, come to find out that Mom just didn't like it.
There were things she made that I absolutely couldn't stand, like tongue and brisket, which I just never, it was never came out quite the way, I don't know, the odor or the taste or whatever.
The brisket was good when she made that.
I have a different food memory of her as an adult that is also a classic Graham tale, I would say, which is the year I lived in Boston, Wendy and I visited Graham unexpectedly. We were close by, we were in the neighborhood, we just knocked on her door and stopped by. She was overjoyed to see us. And the first thing she said after regaining her composure, seeing her two granddaughters just outside her door like that, was, "Hold on, I have a bundt cake in the freezer. I'll go get it out for us."
And we talked a lot about cooking. She shared cookbooks with me and recipes, because her mother belonged to this organization, a Jewish organization, and they would pull recipes together and put together cookbooks. So Harriet had a number of cookbooks with her mother's recipes in them. Because I asked for family recipes and things. And so she would pull out these books and we would pore over them and pore over the recipes.
Cooking always made her really nervous when we were in the kitchen with her. She was kind of a nervous person anyway. That's why it always shocked me that when our kids were there and when she was the grandmother instead of the mother, she was so patient with them in the kitchen and just loved working with them in the kitchen. Because I don't remember that at all growing up, that it made her kind of nervous if we were around trying to help.
I remember when I was making chocolate chip cookies with Bubby, she was I put the bowl back in the sink and there was still some mix in it, and she taught me that Grandma always told her never waste a job while cooking. So now from then on, I always when I was cooking make sure I everything was used, and I would think of Graham how she always said never waste a job.
One thing about cooking, she was in a relationship that was a very traditional kind of relationship. So it was men's work and there was women's work, and she took care of the meals, and especially for a big meal like the Seder, she would do everything. And it wasn't until much later when my sister and I were trying to put a Seder together, we realized what an incredible amount of work it was that she did all by herself. And she was the last person to sit down at the table, always.
Well, I just remember even as a really young kid, whenever we would show up, our family would get there, sometimes late at night from whatever flight across the country. And she always had fresh tapioca pudding with strawberry sauce ready for us to eat, no matter what time of day or night we got there. And that's, part of what she did as kind of a homemaker. She always had treats, and she could always pull a strudel out of the freezer or whatever. She was just so prepared to be a hostess.
She had a lot of things she shouldn't eat, but she absolutely did. And I used to make a lot of food from scratch, and she was very excited to give it a try. So for Rachel's college graduation in Santa Cruz, we were out there all together, and I was making knishes. And knishes have a lot of onion in them, and onion is one of the things that Graham did not digest well. So I looked her in the face and I said, Graham, I'm going to make some of these without onions for you. So you can eat them and it won't hurt you. And she looked at me and she said, oh, Carmel, you can't make a knish without onions. And so she insisted that I put the full amount of onions in, and she just sort of suffered the consequences.
Aunt Minna, I remember she would always say, Aunt Minna used to make the best fudge, and no surprise, it was mostly food related. And that was the best. Who was it? I think Pop's mother made the best gefilte fish, and it was very food related, which I think a lot of us still carry on for sure, even though we all have the worst stomachs in the entire world.
And one of the things that she made, which I've never been able to duplicate, is her Passover sponge cake with this lemon filling that was so light and fluffy. I have no idea how she did that. Anytime I've tried to do anything like that, it came out flat like a pancake.
So I think Graham was a person who definitely liked sweet things in life. And she really valued the sweetness of life.
You and Diane and Ruth Meltzer.
Yeah. The three of us got together. We took a course at the Y. And we didn't think anything was really going to come of it, but after the course ended, we decided to get together and keep it up. So another friend of mine, suggested we go down to her basement and continue doing it in her basement. So Ruth was very talented, and Diane had a lot of talent too. So. I didn't have that much talent, but they all helped me out, and we all managed to make some pretty good things.
That she did the copper enameling as her medium, I thought was so awesome, not just because it's really unique. I don't know anybody else in the world. I'm sure obviously other people do it as well or have done it, but it was just such a unique art form for her. And with the kiln and everything, sort of the special equipment you needed and skills you needed to do that. And I want to use the word permission to do something sort of outside of the box, things that weren't what everybody does. If you're an artist, people draw or paint maybe, but she did this totally different thing and became really skilled at it.
She got involved with copper enameling with her friends. And I would, when I was in Boston in nursing school, I would take her copper enameling around to different gift shops, and they see if they would take it on consignment. So she got very, very good at that. So she was very creative. I don't know, I wouldn't say that I'm creative, but she was definitely artistic and very creative.
One trait that Graham, my mother, and I all have in common is we all claim to not be artists, despite pursuing artistic pursuits. And Graham is the first woman I ever heard do this, Graham is one of the most talented artists I think I've ever met. And she insisted over and over again that she wasn't an artist. And I observed that uncritically because I was too young to think otherwise, until I started seeing my mom do the exact same behavior. And my mother is also phenomenally gifted at the things she can do with her hands, and the passion she brings to, I want to learn how to do that. I think I can do that. I'm going to try to do that. And I have that too. And all three of us absolutely push aside any identity of art being associated with that. I'll say, oh, no, that's just quilting and cross-stitch knitting, handicrafts. paper sewing, collage making, heart playing, that's not art. And Graham was exactly like that. She'd make beautiful pieces of art and just would never claim that identity. Of her artwork, I just have a very small butterfly, a copper enameling butterfly on the fridge. Yeah, of her artwork, that's all I have. I think someone gave it to me. So I think it came from a larger set of work, because I remember these they were on her fridge growing up. I remember seeing them there.
I remember one of my favorite memories is when me, Bubby, and Graham went to Botanical Garden, and it was just this. It was so pretty because it was in the spring, and there was all these like beautiful flowers. And when we were there, I remember I was near the railing, and Graham started getting worried that I was going to fall, and like she kept telling me to back away. It wasn't like that bad, but she was like overreacting, and it was really funny.
That's funny.
And so that's one of my favorite memories to remember. And in my dance studio, we did this dance to a rose garden. It was called Rose Garden. And one of my dance teacher always kept telling us that when we're dancing, we have to dance with like a purpose, and using like our like life experiences to like connect to the dance. And that was always one of the memories I used when I was thinking of that dance.
Well, that's very cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's cool.
Wendy, Derek, and I will like joke. We used to joke at like when we were in our 20s. I'd be like, I only talk to my mom on a Sunday, once a week. We talked. She would never call me during the week. And Wendy would complain about you guys. It's about the same way. And Derek would say the same. He's like, we talk on Sundays when you don't live at home. And it hit me once. I was like, that's because my mom never talked to her mom all the time, right? Like me and my mom pick up the phone all the time when we talk. But she didn't have that relationship, because it was hard of, Graham was hard of hearing. Like she couldn't just pick up the phone. It was a big deal, And I'm sure it was the same thing. It just wasn't like what you were used to, because we had, your grandma, it was different for us. It took my mom years to break that Sunday habit, by the way, like years. So finally now she'll pick up the phone in the middle of the week and call.
But it was really as an adult that I got to know her and spend time with her, because I would drive up every summer to visit with Judy and the kids when they were little, and spend time with Aunt Harriet. And that's how I really got to build a personal relationship with her and get to know her and just enjoy her company. We spent hours and hours just talking. And then she would have errands to run. So, we would get in the car and drive and, go on her errands together before going out to lunch. There was always lunch. There was always food with Aunt Harriet. Whatever you did, there was always food there. But as we were driving along, she wanted to talk and have a conversation in the car. So she's driving. I'm sitting here in the driver's seat, and she's looking at me so she can hear me talk. And I'm like holding on for dear life. There's a stop sign coming up. There's a red light. Look at the road. It was, driving with her was not for the faint of heart, let me tell you.
One of the stories would be when we went to Irv's wedding. We were all standing around, and she we had all met Jane, his soon-to-be wife at that point, and we look over, and me and Graham had actually flown down there. That was one of the trips, and we had met her previously, but we were the only ones. So it was me, my mom, and my dad, and we were looking over, and Graham was basically hugging this woman, and I'm like, how does she know who this person is? Thinking it must be a cousin of someone I didn't know. And Graham walks over, and she was like, who is that? And we were like, she was like, that was Jane. and it was not Jane. And then Graham was absolutely hysterical that she had basically gone on with this woman, but it goes back to the point where she carries a conversation so easily because she just knew how to read the room, that this woman probably thought, oh, this woman knows who I am. Graham was thinking the same thing, and it went on, smashingly.
But appearances always mattered a great deal to her. And so often, when I would go and take her on these shopping excursions, we would just be trying on brown pair of slack after brown pair of slack, and they all looked exactly the same. And then towards the end of her life, her stomach was so distended that it was just really hard, because she was so tiny, but her stomach kind of did stick out, and it was hard to find pants that would fit her. And so ultimately I would go and I'd feel so successful, and I'd usually call my aunt and call my mom afterwards, like, I got her 3 pairs of slacks. I'm the best in the universe, and then come to find out a couple months later that she made Judy return all of it because it was unacceptable.
So then I graduated in 2000 and moved to New York, and I was single, finally had my first job and realized doing the grind. And I was like, okay, I have 1 week off. I am not staying home with 1 week and doing nothing with it. Like, let's do something fun. So I reached out to her and I was like, so would you want to do another trip? And I was like, let's go back to Europe. And she was like, yeah, right away, definitely. And I remember saying, you pick it. I'm like, I've already been all over Europe. Like, where do you want to go? So she picked France, and we had the best time. Like, we started in Paris. I showed her like all the gardens, like the Rodin Museum, and all like the, on again, off again thing. We did like a whole few days in Paris. And, then we went down to Nice for like, to see like the Riviera. We had a whole thing planned out down there. And we had a phenomenal time. Obviously, she was obsessed with finding the perfect crepe, which I didn't even know what a crepe was at the time, but I remember wherever we went, she would be sampling the different crepes. Such a foodie. So great trip. And then let's see, the day we were supposed to leave, 9/11 happened.
Atlantic inbound aircraft, this is US Air 27. We're receiving word from our dispatch that a plane has flown into the World Trade Center in New York City.
So it was wild, right? So like we went back to our hotel and turned on the TV, and this is when, at this point, like we forget this, but this is when she was completely deaf, right? Like that whistle, do you remember the whistle was going, the whole trip, that was going on the whole time. And totally deaf, and we turn on the TV and I see what's going on. You see the towers, and she was just like, what is going on? Because it's all in French, and we're both in the same boat at this point. I don't understand what's going on. She doesn't understand what's going, and just watching the images of it and then piecing it all together was just horrifying. So, as you're getting the newscast, it's like, okay, and the borders to the US are officially closed, right? You're not coming back in. And so, the French people were unbelievable. Like, I have to say, like they were catering to every American that was stuck over there. They couldn't have been better. And we were there for like 4 or 5 extra days. And I would just, every morning I would go and buy like every newspaper I could find. I'd come back. We would just like rip through the newspapers to try to get updated on what was going on. I would I'd call my mom and just unleash, right? Of just sheer panic. Like, what am I going to do? Grandma at the time too, her stomach was, always an issue. And at this point, her stomach was a mess. She had the worst stomach pains going on. So I would just call my mom and totally panic and say, I don't know how we're ever getting home. And then we'd go on and have a great day. And my poor mother would be like crying all day, right? Like her mother and her daughter were stuck in a foreign country. But then we would make them, we had some nice extra days. It's just hard to enjoy it when you're like, okay, I know we shouldn't be complaining, but we want to get home. And I was living in New York City at the time. So it was crazy. I knew people, I didn't know, like it was a lot. But, the craziest part of that story is, so we're in southern France, and Paris is how you have to get out. And they had shut off all Americans were not allowed to go to Paris. That's what they were saying. They said, there's no hotels for you. There are no airlines going on. Like at this point, the flights weren't going. And they wouldn't let your connecting flight, basically, if you were an American, go from anywhere else to Paris because they were already slammed with too many Americans trying to get out of Paris. So after like a few days, I had heard that they were letting people, like now you hear that the airlines, the flights were starting to move. And they wouldn't let our connecting flight go. But I heard people were getting out, right? So I put us on a train because I was like, well, there's no, I didn't know, we didn't have a hotel booked in Paris or anything. So I put us on a train because I was hearing there was a chance you could get out. So we got on a train, went up to Paris with no hotel, like no plan. I mean, and she was 80 something. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do if this doesn't work out. So we went straight to the airport and I just begged. I just got up to the front desk. I'm like, she is old and sick and we have to get out of here. And eventually they were like, no. And I just begged and they got us on a flight that day. Thank God. Like we had no hotel, no plan. I was like, we are going to be sleeping in this airport with her tonight. So anyways, quite an adventure for someone that age, but she handled it like a champ, I have to say. She just followed my lead and we got out.
When sound waves reach the ear, they are gathered by the funnel-shaped outer ear and channeled into the middle ear. As sound passes to the middle ear, the sound waves hit the tympanic membrane or eardrum. The vibrations then travel through the middle ear and reach the fluid-filled inner ear. The inner ear contains an important structure called the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, sound vibrations move tiny hairs that are attached to nerve fibers. In this way, sounds are converted to signals that are sent to the brain via the auditory nerve. Disease, damage, or deformity of the cochlear hair cells is a common cause of hearing impairment or deafness. These malfunctioning hair cells may send intermittent or unclear signals to the auditory nerve, or send no signal at all. A device called a cochlear implant can restore hearing by replacing these damaged structures with a wire that is implanted in the cochlea. In order to stimulate the hearing process, sound waves are first received by a microphone unit that hangs over the back of the ear. The sounds are then passed via a thin wire to a speech processor that is often worn on the belt. This processor amplifies and filters sound before converting it into digital signals. These digital signals are sent back via the same wire to a transmitter located on the head. The transmitter then sends radio signals to a receiving unit embedded just under the scalp. The receiving unit then stimulates the wire implanted in the cochlea, enabling the cochlea to send clear signals to the auditory nerve. Although the surgery permanently damages the cochlea, cochlear implants can greatly improve hearing, even in people who are profoundly deaf.
And the cochlear implant was a big one because the scare with that was that she would lose whatever she had left, and she had nothing essentially, but she felt like she did. She felt like if she slammed a door, she'd hear that. But she had nothing at the end. So there was really so little risk. But Pop, she had that bad operation when she was younger, and he just didn't want to he was a cautious guy.
She was able to communicate more freely, didn't probably have to strain as much to understand people because it was there. She was, very much focused on lip reading, and she didn't have to do that anymore. She was able to watch TV. She was able to live a normal life. When she was younger, her hearing was never even recorded when they monitor her hearing. Did not even show up on the graph.
She was at that point one of the oldest people, I think, ever to have that cochlear implant surgery. They were usually doing it for young kids. And so there were serious risks with doing that. And she was in her mid 80s, late 80s, I guess, when she did that. So that was a really big deal. And even with the challenges with the processor and needing to go into the audiologist and get it readjusted, I don't think she ever regretted that. I think she was so grateful to learn to reinterpret sound again, because technically she wasn't hearing, she was reinterpreting sounds. But I think it was so fun for her to get to hear again.
I was close to my mom. I was the oldest child, and I felt like she depended on me a lot because my dad was a workaholic, so he wasn't around very much. And so she used frequently, I was her support system a lot of the time. So I kind of felt that pressure, but I was also close to her. So I would help her with her lip reading lessons. I remember we would sit in her bedroom, and I think we were working on like the words to songs. She really loved music, and I would mouth it, and she would try to repeat back what I said. I was also very different than my mother. I was always pretty casual and kind of a tomboy. She was very, well, we would say she was vain. She was very, very much concerned about her appearance, which as she grew older was very frustrating to especially to me and my sister, while we were trying to help her with clothes shopping and things like that. But when she was older, one time I looked at pictures of her as a young woman, and she was so beautiful and so stylish. And so I really understood why that was so important to her. I think that was one way that we were very different, because I've never been really that concerned about style. And I was never that feminine a person like my sister is. My sister is very, very feminine and very stylish. And in some ways I felt like I disappointed her that way, because I wasn't like that. I wasn't like her that way. But when she was older, one time she said to me, Judy loves makeup, and she dresses really beautifully. And just like, and I was thinking, yeah, just like you, Mom. And she said, but you're my natural beauty. And that really touched me. I don't think I've ever forgotten that I felt like she had accepted me.
That she was an absolute role model to me. She made me a better mother. I learned a lot from her. I learned how to be, she was just so trusting and supportive. She let us make our own decisions. She'd give us input, but it was always us that made the decisions. The traits. One of the things to think about was the traits that we shared, my mom and I. I think I can be selfless, especially with my kids. I think that I like to think of myself as my mom was, as a good listener. I love gossip, and she loved gossip. I always think that I look awful in photos, as she did. I'm very critical of how other people look in photos, as she was. And the test, it's always in my family. It was like, if the picture can pass the mom test, then they know, they're like, finally, it's a good picture. Mom will accept it. I'll accept it. She did not accept aging gracefully, as I don't. She was obsessed with wrinkles, and I'd go up there, even the last, year or so, would be sitting there, and she'd be like, look at my hands. She would like, look at, they're so wrinkled, and look at the brown spots on them, and she was obsessed. She'd always look at her hands and her, and so we share that. I actually can look at my hands and see my mom's hands. We have the exact same hand, and equally as wrinkled. She was picky with clothes. I'm not as bad, but I am picky. but I love clothes and she loved clothes, and I loved makeup and she loved makeup. We both, I love exercising as she did, and we both shared that it was important to keep physically fit. And we are both warriors. She worried about a lot, and believe me, I share that with her as well.
We talk a lot to each other about our personal feelings. Of course, when I was young, it was me talking about my feelings. As she got older, talking about her, what was going on in her life, how she's feeling, her insecurities, which of course she felt more comfortable when she got older. When she was younger, it was of course, just me talking about my feelings. I never held anything back from her. I could say anything to her regarding good things or bad things in my life, and she was 100% understanding, and as I was to her as she got older. So she supported me whatever I did, whether it was sports or learning new things in life, education, my job environment. She was always supportive of it. As at times I would have my ups and downs in life, and she would be always 100% supportive of whatever I did. So it was comforting to know that she was not judgmental, and she let me live my life, which was great. She wasn't overbearing in any way, shape, or form, which made a big difference in me and my self-confidence. The mother-son bond is above any other love, and I very much miss that where I could just be 100% myself with her and know that we just have limitless love between us. That without question is the thing I miss the most. Even though I think about her, but the fact that not being able to see her and express my love to her and her showing her love back to me is heavily missed, is very much missed.
Another example of her resiliency was when she broke her hip, and then 3 months later, we were all trekking through Italy with her leading the charge. She didn't let us stop her. She just kept going and going.
When she broke her hip, I remember I was planning to move in with her for a little bit, but we moved her bed. We got a twin size bed and we moved it downstairs into the dining room, took the dining room table, moved it to the basement. And she was supposed to do that, sleep down there because she couldn't walk up steps. Needless to say, I think she slept on that bed one day before she was climbing those stairs to get into her own actual bed.
And then I remember when she lived in the condo when I was very young, then we would play like hide and seek and stuff like that, which obviously she couldn't do later on.
When Sam was old enough to remember, Graham lived at the Willows. I want to say the Willows.
With the pool.
The pool, yeah. So we would take the kids up there to see her, and they had a pool, and the kids would all go swimming, and she would show off all her, her great grandkids, and the kids would love going there. Probably a lot had to do with the pool, but we would go there. And even recently, in the last one, the one on the Dodge Park, I think it was Dodge Park, the last one, we'd go there and hang out with her, and we loved seeing her there. And so wherever she went, she made it feel like home. She did, because I never go in there and feeling just as comfortable with her. So it was nice.
The most recent visit that I had with her was when Andrew and I went to visit her at the Willows, and we just had a lovely visit. We stayed with her for, I don't remember how long, at least a few days, and stayed the night at her place. And actually, Andrew and I were just talking about this the other day, and he's like, the thing I remember is in the middle of the night, some alarm in her apartment would start going off that she had no idea because she couldn't hear it, but it would wake us up every night, and we were running around trying to figure out what it was. But we just had a lovely visit with her, and we were like ready to retire and move into a retirement home right then.
So what kind of activities do you like to do here at the Willows?
I like my exercise class. And they have a lot of very good speakers here. So I like to attend the speakers. And then I go to bingo. And then they have different outings here and places of interest where you can go.
But you don't do those, do you?
Oh yeah.
Where do you go?
Go in the bus. They take you in the bus.
And you go on the bus too?
Yeah. Or if you want to go clothes shopping, that's how I go on the bus.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I can't. How could I go otherwise?
And you go to the movies, they have captioned movies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I went there a couple of times. I didn't, and I went up there and told them,
Yeah.
I'm getting nothing out of these movies.
Yeah.
And they put on the captions.
Good.
So,
I'm glad you told them that.
Yeah.
You like to go to the entertainment too, don't
Oh,
you?
yeah. If it's something I know I can enjoy, I
Mhm.
go. If they're talking about things that I'm not interested in, I don't go. But most of the time I go, you might as well do something at night. The dinner is over at 7 o'clock, and then what? You either watch TV, or you read a book, or you go to entertainment. So I chose entertainment.
She was all about love. You know, she total acceptance. Even if she didn't understand why we were doing what we were doing, she always loved us and made that very clear.
You know, and as far as I was thinking about it, she basically lived a perfect life, right? In the time period that she lived, and to live to 99, it's incredible. And in fact, I was also thinking about, like, when I was a kid, I always felt that she was proud of me. But as I got older, I would brag about her all the time. And you know, in what I do, you know, I walk into a lot of rooms and introduce myself, and I interact with a lot of elderly people. And then we start, you know, you tell stories about life, and I would frequently bring up Graham, right? And I even remember right at the end, she was on the cover of her nursing home newsletter, right? That there's like a photo of her, and I had it on my phone, and I would show people, I would show patients, you know, and so it is kind of interesting how that evolved from, you know, what I felt to be her so proud of me, to in the end, I was, you know, proud of her that she lived such a, you know, such a full and high functioning life right up until the very end, which I think is, you know, extremely impressive to do.
The one memory of Harriet that I remember that I do want to convey is really towards the end of her life. As some people know, my mother, we had a 100th birthday party from my mother in 2014. And Harriet was invited and came, of course. She must have been, I don't know, 90, whatever, 90 something. And so I went over, she was staying at Corinne's house in Rockville Center, which was the adjoining town to where my mother lived in Freeport. And so I went there with my eldest son, Michael, and Melinda, and our eldest granddaughter, Eliza. And, you know, I talked to Harriet, and Michael, my son, wound up having a long conversation with Harriet. Now, he had probably only met Harriet maybe once before. I mean, you know, once, you know, I grew up, we didn't go to Worcester that much. He never had any dealings with her really as an adult. And he just spent a time talking to her. She's talked to him. And he just talked to me afterwards and told me how enjoyable it was. Again, it's all part of the warmth that comes, and that's the one word that I keep going over and over and over in my mind about Harriet.
We were extremely close. I was kind of the you know, the only boy in the family, so we had that bond, the mother-son bond. Very strong love, very strong. We just had that connection that the son has with his mother, and it lasted our entire lives. It was an extremely tight bond.
She was a really sensory-oriented person, which it would be easy to think she wasn't because of her deafness, but she loved being embodied. She, you know, she made art, she ate food, she tried dancing. She was a really in her body person, and really seeking the pleasure of being embodied. throughout her life.
Being a psych major in college and studying, there was a psychologist, Carl Rogers, and his theory on, psychology was that like he shifted psychology because he didn't have an opinion. So where other, prior to him, therapists would say like, you should try this, go home with these activities. And his theory of psychology was that he would repeat back to you what you would say almost, if you said, I feel this way, he'd be like, oh, so what I hear is you're saying this, right? And people were just getting better and better, right? It worked. And it was like, they just need a sounding board, right? And part of his theory was people just need to accept who they are and just love who they are. And then that's when they'll be their best self. And I was like, that's kind of what she was like, right? She was just this sounding board and you just left feeling good because you just kind of talked about yourself and she got so much out of it.
She like looked me in the eyes and she's like, you can do it. You're smart. You can figure it out. I believe in you, sort of thing. And she would listen and she would say, hey, you can do this. Like whatever it is, you feel like you can't do, you can. And and she believed in me.
Another characteristic of her, I would say, was fun. She was just a fun person. She had a contagious laugh, and she laughed the hardest about herself, which I think is such a funny quality. And I think that a lot of us, once again, this family have it. She was self-deprecating, but in like the most hilarious way. And she was never afraid to be the butt of a joke. But that was just her fun nature. And I think it also was when we were kids, she would, going over to her house, it would be this one-on-one undivided attention. And it was, playing card games or the balloon game or anything to entertain you and just make you feel like you were really the only person there, which was such a, once again, grandmother quality, but she lived it to the fullest.
She was brave. She didn't let her deafness stop her from trying new things, even when the stuff was really difficult for her. When she was at the Willows, if no matter what class was, I swear she took cooking and pottery and ceramics and all kinds of any class that was out there she did. She was just willing to try anything. Again, she hated being bored. She was I admired how totally committed she was to being a parent, to being a wife, even when her hearing was deteriorating, and how terrifying that must have been for her, just as it kept getting worse.
I never heard Aunt Harriet say anything negative about people,
right,
or even situations. When talking to her and something would come up, she would always say something positive, even if it was only a sort of reassuring that these things happen, or and I don't remember specific things, but
it'll be all right.
It'll be okay. And I think that's a very powerful thing to say to a young person who's growing up.
Aunt Harriet was just such a nurturing person. She was very welcoming of me and very just lovely to me, and you just felt completely nurtured by her whenever you were around her.
No, I think Graham was just a really good listener. And that was sometimes more. Sometimes it's better not to say anything but to listen. And I think Graham was really good at that, and that's what I kind of loved about her. The fact is she would just listen.
So you couldn't hide anything from her, that means?
No, because I think a lot of times so many people try to tell you what to do and tell you how to act and tell you to be this. And Graham, I actually kind of respected that about Graham. She never did that. She just would listen. And that's what you need sometimes.
She would tell you what she thought about whatever it was or whoever it was that we were talking about. She was, she had her strong opinions and made them known without any shame, which I think is something to strive towards, really.
I miss Grandma. Like, I remember whenever we went into to visit her, she was always so excited about her family coming. And I just miss her.
What did you admire most about Harriet?
Her kindness, her courage, her willingness to experience new things and embrace new technologies, her ability to connect with others and maintain those connections over time. All of those qualities, I just marvel at them.
She showed a lot of courage, though. That's one thing I really admire about her. She had 3 surgeries on her ears, and the first 2 were unsuccessful. They did nothing for her. And she had the courage, this was after my dad died, she had the courage to go forward and try another surgery with a cochlear implant, which was successful and made just a huge difference in her life. So that took a lot of guts, a lot of courage. So I admire her for that. She was older. She was in her 80s, I think, at that point.
She was always I've noticed she's always very well dressed and cared about, you know, being kind to people and how she carries herself when she was in public. I definitely liked how she carried herself in front of people.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, their house was my home away from home when I lived on the East Coast. So when I couldn't go home to Oregon, I went home to Worcester.